I'm just going to start at the end. And so, you know, it's a good place to sort of think, what do I want to, what sort of reporting, what sort of analysis do I want to do? That way you can do sort of a cost benefit analysis around how much effort you put into resource planning versus what you're going to get out of it at the end. And this first report that I'm showing is a forward workload that looks at two different perspectives, kind of aligned to what I was just talking about in terms of short-term versus long-term thinking. And what we've got in this is four separate visualizations. This is the overall project split up into two different offices for this organization. And you can see that it's definitely suffering a COVID letdown there. It's there's 100% dotted line going across the top, and we're barely over 50% most months in September and next year, Q3, I can't read that number. It's looking pretty dire. You can actually magnify these with a little square up the top here and have it split out into more detail. So yeah, that March month next is really dire, along with this month as well. Going back, I click this back to report, I can go back to the four integrated ones, and they actually start to play out. So below this is the people within that organization, and you could have that down to classification instead of people. That's up to you, and probably for larger organizations more relevant. So this could be junior quantity surveyor, senior quantity surveyor, junior PM, senior PM, etc., however you classify those people. And we can start to get interactive. So, you know, Ian might be getting a little bit concerned about the redundancy watch on that one because he's got 0%. He's not working on any projects. And you can see that these graphs update when you interact with them. And if we look at, I think it was Andy, it's very poor as well. Christopher is over allocated. But you can see that it's actually mainly in the next 2 months, and then he's got absolutely nothing going on after that. So that's just an example of how you can interact with these four visualizations and start to get a feel for, you know, what they're doing. This bottom left that I'm clicking on is a week by week, so it's a very tactical look ahead, whereas this is going out into the future. So you can see that we're going out into a 6-month look ahead there where we might need to recruit. And so that's just an example of some of the stuff that you can do. You can build your own versions of these and get exactly out of it what you want. So this comes from a Power BI integration. You can see, I'm not going to do anything on it, but you can see that's the same visualization in a Power BI desktop version. Power BI desktop sits on your computer. It enables you to create your own, and then working with us, we can publish that and embed it in our application. So this is actually within the UniPhi application here. And that's the key difference between other, I mean, A, it's seamless. You don't need to do any extraction, transform, and load. It's just there. But secondly, sharing that information is a bit problematic in Power BI. So, you know, we've solved that problem by enabling you to embed that into the core application, so any of your users can actually, depending on their role and access level, access this information. Out of the box as well, we have a standard tabular, the old style tabular based reports. People who know me well will know that sort of tables is where I find information a bit easier than visual, because I'm just not a visual person. And in this scenario, we've got a variety of different ones. Again, this is a bit of a tactical one. You have the filter here on over and under allocated that you can filter across your portfolio. It shows Andy and the projects that he's working on, and it gives you a bit of a performance benchmarking view of the world. You know, how many was actually worked on from the timesheet system, how much is forecasted to be worked on, and what the original baseline was. So a little bit more data there across Andy's portfolio, and other resources will come in down the page. So Annie Lennox is singing her way through the Argonaut Tower of Mooney Ponds, and she's doing 16 hours a week on that project. And so again, it can be exported out to Excel and shared around in meetings, and it's a feedback loop for what people are expected to do. The total down here would be the test for the over allocation, and that actually reminds me of something really important I was going to say right up the front. To get this stuff to work, there's a couple of key setup items. Not a lot, but a couple of key setup items. The first one is that you need to have standard hours for people. And this could represent, you know, part-time resource as well. So if someone's part-time and you're using 8 hours as standard and they're 50% part-time, you can set them up as a 4 hours per day standard. So if I click in on Annie again, and she's doing it for herself, and she's got a standard of 8 hours per day. So she's a full-time resource. It could be 7.5, 7.6, 7.3, whatever your standard is. That's very important later on for the system to determine over allocation and under allocation. And so without that, it becomes, basically you can't use it. The other thing that you may want to consider, and this is less important, that standard hours is essential, is the use of classifications. So if I go to rate history, you can see here that there's a classification list that you can allocate to people. That star means that that classification's actually been deleted, so you'd need to reallocate Annie into the role of quantity surveyor perhaps, or something else. And what that enables you to do is to then aggregate into those classifications rather than just looking at roles. And so you can see the total number of quantity surveyors, or even the multiplier method here, you could do so total of junior versus senior, cadet, etc. that you've got. And you can create those lists yourself, and that enables you to aggregate that data. So that's a setup thing. And then whenever you put hours against people, you can then aggregate by that. Equally, you could aggregate dummy resources classified like that rather than have people set up on the job. So sometimes when you're doing early stage, probably all the time, estimates of a project you haven't even won yet, or you've just won it and you're not sure who's going to work on it, you can still get that overall portfolio profile of your business by putting a dummy role of quantity surveyor into that job and putting the hours that persons or people collectively are expected to be allocated to that. And I'll demonstrate that in a moment. So classification is useful. Standard hours is essential. And the other way we're going to enable you to analyze information is, if I just pick a project, is by role. And so again, if you wanted to aggregate by those instead of by classification, that's a possibility as well. And so you can utilize the way you've structured up the roles in your deployment to do aggregated resource planning. And you'll see that it embeds itself into the interface of actually capturing the data as well, in the sense that you'll see that we'll be able to filter for people who are cost managers and put resource allocation against them, and then filter for development manager, put resource allocation against them, if we've got large pools of people, as a way of trying to create subsets of that information. Okay, so going back to some of the other reports, this is again another tactical one that has a little bit more information around it rather than just the tables of information. You've got what their standard capacity is, and you can see that Sheila hasn't got standard hours. So again, that's a letdown in the system, as we can't really know how many she's supposed to be working without that figure, and what the forecast is, and therefore what capacity Kate Blanchett has to perform. Now that's an aggregate across all of her projects, and then on the second page of this report, it might time out on me actually, because, oh no, there we go. You've got the projects that Kate's actually working on and that Sheila's working on. So you can see who the project manager is. So depending again, which is going to be one of my polls at the end of this session, is the process. Who's doing this work? What role are they in for doing this resource planning work? Depending on how that is, that field has been put in there to assist people in working with the person who's managing that. So if Kate isn't actually estimating her own work, which is an option, we could go to Howard and say, Howard, have you, we're going to need to put Sheila on this project instead of Kate, because Kate's fully utilized, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see that option is a role 1, role 2, role 3 option that you can select up the top here to make it as flexible as possible. And then depending on which selection you make, it'll put whoever's in that role into the table below. And then again, you can see going out, depending on the timeline that you've set here and the fact that there's data in the system, into the future when the hours have been booked and when they're expected to be working on that particular project. This one here is my particular favorite for strategic planning, because it's a sort of a double whammy, if you like. You kill two birds with one stone, and it's a throwback to a report we built for a sizable client, 500 people working in the business in different locations around Australia. And, the project leads on their jobs were tasked with cash flowing their jobs, and then they leveraged that into a sort of a resource planning, strategic planning, recruitment look ahead by basically forecasting that against service codes that aligned to what they did in their business. And what that enabled the managing director to do was to look at that rolled up number normally aggregated into location, so they group by location, so they'd get it how many they need in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, etc. And they could look at that number and say, okay, to support, you know, $100,000 worth of cost planning, they wouldn't normally have these extra phases in there. But with Power BI, you could aggregate across that as well. But this report just looks at the service codes, the codes that you allocate to the revenue. I'm going to need 10 QSs. I'm going to need, you know, 5 QSs, and it's going to be a mix of 2 directors and 8, you know, or 2 directors, 4 senior QSs, and 4 junior, or whatever the ratio was. And so they could, you know, rule of thumb, get the thumb out there, have a look, and have some sort of plan about what they're going to need to do in their in the future recruitment. And I still haven't got my polls, most annoying. Because that was one of the other polls I was going to have, which I'll drop into the conversation now. And feel free to use the chat function to share your thoughts on this, is how accurate do you expect your forecasting to be? So I'm going to show you a method now to do the tactical one. And I guess it's depending on what you're doing. If it's next week and the next 4 weeks, you might be expecting, you know, plus or minus 10% accuracy, maybe. I don't know. It depends on how stable your business is. And the options in the poll were plus or minus 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50%. And so what are you looking for? How granular are you looking to go when you're doing resource planning? So, you know, this particular spreadsheet view, if you like, or table view, was a real order of magnitude. You know, they knew that numbers were going to change. You know, depends on the outcome of certain things, but it gave them an idea. And so they could start to plan recruitment processes, talk to recruiters, see what the marketplace is like, see who's around, who's looking, do that LinkedIn trolling that people do these days. Back then, that when this was really used, this report, it wasn't available, but, you know, those sorts of things can start to occur. So yeah, how accurate are you expecting your resource planning? All right, so jumping into how this data gets captured. The first demonstration is a tactical resource plan. This one is something we developed in the last couple of years because a client requested it. And as I said, came really left field, was having all of these long-term strategic resource planning functionality. And suddenly that we said, oh yeah, we can do resource planning. When it showed them, we go, that's not what we want. We want to know what people are doing next week. And so we solved that by basically creating this forward workload timesheet. And so one element about this that I really love is UniPhi's philosophy as a product, being a web-based product the whole time. It was developed since 2003. Is our concept is you've got qualified people working in the system generally, because we target, you know, consulting and professional organizations. Distribute the data capture to people who are as close to the effort as you can. And so in this instance, what happens is people actually forecast their own workload. So this is their day-to-day actual work that they're doing in their timesheets. And if I click on the forecast sub-navigation, I can then add in the projects that I think I'm going to work on over the next, and the type of work I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks. And then I can go in and put time against those particular activities, add extra projects as the case may be, and build up my particular view of my work. And what that will do is feeds directly into this particular report here. And that's where that data will come from. And then you can run this report, you know, print it out to Excel, share it on a big screen, have a meeting, whatever the case may be, and just start moving that allocation around and basically getting people to shift their focus. And it's a two-way benefit there. You're getting communication to the people on delivering the work for you that's not the right priority. You need to be focused on this client or what have you. Or that's over budget. Is there a variation we can raise for this particular piece of work as early as possible in that process? And so once they've saved that, that's going to flow straight through into those reports. They click on the next week and they can do the same in there. They can copy the data from last week if they want to, and they can start to you know, basically bring that next 4 weeks ahead or next 2 weeks ahead, however far out you want them to go. And week by week, they're basically pushing the next week out. So a maintenance basis after that is just the next week and tweaking the existing forecast that they already had. You can see that an administrator can do that on behalf of other people as well. But yeah, that's a very tactical and interesting methodology that I know is actively being used in an organization that has a reasonable number of people, 3-figure headcount. So that's that. That's an interesting one. It definitely would drive through into your Power BI, this weekly percentage allocation view. As mentioned, you've got the over allocation filter. You can bring into these things. It's telling you who's back over here on the first page, who's under and who's over allocated, just as a portfolio of people. And then you get to see their projects and start to move things around. All right. The next one I'm going to go through is the majority of this presentation. It's basically an end-to-end process that we think has more benefits than just resource planning. I haven't found many organizations that do resource planning to the depth that most people who start talking to me about resource planning want to get to, and I think it's mainly because it's a effort overkill for the benefit they get, because the world moves too fast and they can never really maintain that. So we're trying to create systems that enable that end goal of having that really nice long-term view of your pipeline, and that can be managed efficiently without consuming people's time. And I'll show you what we've come up with so far, and you can shoot it down or give us some feedback on it. But essentially what the sort of design goal of all of this is outlined in this little PowerPoint. So obviously we want to get a resource plan, something, for at least the next 6 months, that can be drilled down into weeks if we need to, but definitely has a good feel for the strategic direction of the business. Does it align to where we're trying to go? Is it in the right sectors? Are we doing enough effort in there? What's that profile look like? But equally out of that, you saw with the forward workload dollar estimate, where we looked at how much was being done on cost planning, post-contract, etc. And you just need your own service codes. You could do it for, any kind of consulting business to do this sort of thing. You'd also get a cash flow. You get a cash flow profile, what's coming into your business, and most businesses right now, that's king. And for most businesses, it's always king. You also get profit at completion instantly. And I've known, we're going to do a webinar in November on profit. There's at least 8 methodologies to develop a profit in UniPhi. If you don't put all the data in, you won't get one. And if you don't follow one of the methodologies, you won't get one as well. But most people are really only getting profitability from an actual sense because people are timesheeting, but because they're not forecasting, they can't get a profit at completion. And so this process will give you a profit at completion, an estimate at completion that says this project's going to be losing money or making X% or whatever the case may be. You'll also get an earned value along the way. So we have some rather large clients who, in big projects with hundreds of people on them, there's always that risk that you're over-servicing, you're spending a lot more time on contract deliverables than you want. You don't get that lookup. There's no integration between time spent versus estimate and earn value from that time spent, how much you've actually progressed that deliverable. And unfortunately, they sometimes have to write off some value on those projects. And this is trying to prevent that from happening as well. And obviously, earn value equals project control. So it's a big consumption to ask. It's what we're really about. It's what we're trying to achieve. And this is where we're at with that at the moment. So the first step in doing that is to actually get UniPhi being the engine for your estimates, either imported in, which is not quite Nirvana, or using UniPhi for estimates. And even then, there's 2 methods for doing that. And the reason we think our system isn't heavily used in this space is we've got to improve our interface. We've got to improve the smoothness and the quickness with which you can do this. So we understand that and we're working on it. But I'm just going to show you today what is available right now with the application that you have and that you've paid us a subscription fee for. I'm going to start my work in the Upper Minas Tirith Primary School, because let's face it, who wouldn't want to go there? And I'm going to start on the summary screen. And the first critical junction, so in terms of timeline for this, we're actually at the beginning. We're at the submission phase, and we're going to use UniPhi to create a quote. I'm going to use it as an estimating platform. As I said, there's 2 methods to do this, so don't shoot me down. This is the first method. And I think for some businesses, it would work really well. And I know a couple of colleagues who we had a different interface for this like 10 years ago. When we removed it, they really, mourned that loss. And this is our replication of that interface in a modern world. So the first step is to actually schedule when you think this project is going to occur and the phases that it's going to occur in. And so these life cycle phases are, again, up to you. It doesn't need to be these ones here. And if you can actually schedule in this information, it's not a lot of data points. It really will help you down the track to manage this information, but also to set it up. And so I'm going to now go to typing instead of selecting because it's quicker. And I'm just basically putting in a basic timeline. This will also enable me to adjust everything, the cash flow and the hours and everything else by changing the dates, and everything will flow through later on. So it makes it easier to maintain the resource plan later. I'm doing it on the baseline side because this is my initial estimate of what it's going to be. And once I get past a certain number of months, I just type the months in because selecting the date control calendar and tabbing through is just too slow. So I'm just randomly picking dates here, so don't read too much into them. Whoops, there's no such thing as 60. And I'm going to go take that one through for a year. And then we'll do our yearly. You can see that tabbing order is a constant debate in our business. I would love this to tab down rather than across, but these are some of the challenges and debates that we have when we're building the software, because we all know software is really easy to build. All right, so that's given me my profile for this particular project, and I'm just going to copy that across to the forecast so that the two match for now. And that's going to help me in the next step. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across to the resources section. And in resources, I can see I've got a fairly sizable team set up here in different roles. And I've got this sub-navigation called resource planning. And I'm going to do this on the budget line. And so the first, you want to select a view here. You want to focus on one thing at a time, not the all. The all is for tracking purposes later on when you've actually got actuals coming in. I'm just going to clear. So you see if you tick that little tick box, you always get extra buttons in UniPhi. There's all these tick boxes going down here. I'm just going to clear this one. I actually had thought I'd check that, but it's got some budget. I don't want any budget. I'm starting with a clean slate. And you can see these little colored lines here represent when project phases start. So if you were to come in here and manually key information in, you'll be able to tell what's in concept and what's in schematic, and that might help you determine how much effort. There's also the ability to put in a percent. And so I'm going to do a bulk. My preference is to bulk add these things in a moment, but just for interface purposes up front, you can put in percent and say, okay, Andy's going to be 50% allocated during schematic design, and then drop down to 25% during that period there. And if there are other people with a similar profile, what you can do is you can tick Andy and say copy profile and say that's the profile for Barry and Kate as well. And then click copy, and they've got the same percentage allocation. Now, Barry has come in with none because he doesn't have standard hours. So again, that emphasizes the need to make sure that the people you need to resource plan for have standard hours, because it's literally 50% of nothing is 0. And so that's one method you could go about doing this sort of stuff, but I'm going to clear that and start from scratch again. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use these phases that I've actually created before to bulk add this information into the system. And so one life cycle at a time, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to select concept, and I'm going to, so that gives me the timeline already. And I'm going to say everyone's doing 10%. So this line up here enables you to bulk update the people below. If I tick this, it'll bulk update everyone except the people with no standard hours. So I'm just going to untick those people, and then I'm going to click apply. And you can see now that it's got that effort. Interestingly, Arthur has not put anything in because he actually isn't in our company anymore. His end date for working was 2019. So we've given you that feedback. So you're not going to get any work out of him. So we'll untick him as well. And then what you can do is you can save that, like with the save button here, and it doesn't actually save to the database, it just saves in the screen and gives you an idea of what that has actually produced. And once you're happy with that, you can click submit, and that information then comes into that profile for that lifecycle phase. And then basically it's a matter of doing that again and again for the different phases, for the different dates. If people are working differently, you could bulk update just those people with a 20% allocation. And then you could say, and I've done Arthur again, who doesn't work for us anymore. And then you could actually untick them because they've now got that information, and tick someone else, and basically just say they're not going to do, but they're going to do 5 hours per week, whatever the case. Or you can even just come in here and maybe just apply the dates at first, remove the 5 hours per week, apply the dates to the remainder of people, and put in your own allocation across those if they're all going to be different. So we tick those and we click apply, get rid of that as well. And that gives us the timeline, and then we can come in here and just go 5. And again, tab order is an interesting one, and they're 10 and they're 20, up to you. Percentages, hours per week, or total hours, entirely up to you. And so we would continually do that until we were happy that we'd done it for all of the lifecycle phases, and we would have that entire project mapped out. Once we've done that, what we can do is we can come into the contract. So that's already given us a resource plan, right? But it's only half the job. We want to actually get a quote out for this job. And so I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go primary, we'll just say QS. We're doing QS work. We'll pick a client. We're going to get hired by the contractor here. We're going to work directly with the contractor rather than the education department, which is good because dealing with Gandalf is just too complicated. And then Howard Shaw is our PM on this job. So that's normally your internal person managing the job. We've got our revenue consulting codes, and we hit save, and that sets up our revenue contract, which is going to be our estimate. We come in here, we click import, resource plan. You can see you can import from Excel as well. And we then decide what we want to import by, and I'm actually going to select lifecycle. And what that does is it actually puts the different lifecycle phases into the contract and all the people that are working on it. And for those who don't know, you can actually roll up in the documentation for the proposal up to these phases, so people don't see the people and the hours and the rates and everything else that have come in. And so that's built my estimate for this particular project instantly. And I haven't gone through and coded it up, which is, again, when you do these things, you go, geez, we could do this better. But anyway, I'll go through and do that. And that's how you could also get that dollar-based, and I'm actually selecting the wrong code there, but anyway, that dollar-based report, because it's based on these codes. And so this will instantly update that. And I'm going to do this. I'm losing people. They're dropping off. You're falling asleep. Wake up. It's not lunchtime yet. We're getting there. I shouldn't have selected so many people. Remember to chat in that your feedback on both what I'm doing now, tell me it's lousy, or how you estimate what you're looking to get out of it. How long do you think this process should take on a monthly basis to resource plan? And what are you looking to get out of it? They're the sort of polling that we're doing at the moment. So that has given me a quote, 139,000 Hong Kong dollars, that I can then send to the tenderer using the proposal document, create the flowery words around it about how great we are, and hopefully win that job. What it's also done is it's given me a start and an end date, which I can come into the phasing of this particular contract and tick auto, and it will cash flow phase out that job for me. You can see it's 69,000 only. Chances are I have some sort of risk adjustment happening on this particular job, and I do. I've said we've got a 50% chance of winning that job. So it's risk adjusted that profile by 50%. So I'm not banking all of my dollars that I'm not going to win. And it really then becomes how accurate you are at estimating how good your quoting is and what the likelihood of winning that job is for your future pipeline. It'll also, in reports, if you wish, risk adjust that resource planning as well, so that you can have work at risk in the resource plan, not just committed jobs. And so what that's enabled me to do now then is to get people to Timesheet. So if I go into the Timesheet module and I add, if I Timesheet as Annie Lennox, I think she was in that, and I add the wonderful Minas Tirith Primary School to her timesheet down the bottom here, you'll see that it's giving her this feedback around when it's due and how much time she has. So should also put in the fact that it's schematic and concept, not analytics, but these are the best laid plans, and these are the feedbacks we'll need to get. This is the new and improved timesheet report that gives you earned value on these graphs. And when Annie timesheets to that, the scheduled hours will go down. She'll be able to update that and feedback to the team and to the project manager group that that's actually going to be 20 hours. And you'll start to see that it's going to overrun. You can then adjust, ask for variations, adjust your forecast, adjust your resource plan, because that will then feed into the forecast resource plan, and so on and so forth. Update your reports. Those portfolio reports will have updated with that information, and you've basically done an end-to-end loop. Because you've got cost rates and charge rates against those people, if you ran a P&L on this, it would have a forecasted cost at completion, and hence you would be able to get a forecasted profit at completion as well. My favorite report for that in our system is the project analysis report. And so if you go into that particular report and you run this project analysis, when it loads, you'll be able to get a at completion estimate for that primary school. I can't see the silly Zoom screens are getting me. That's location. Yeah, I have to run it on all. I'll have to get it out to a timeline that's valid. This is always interesting because I've just added data and I haven't previewed this, so we'll see what returns. You can see it's a portfolio report. I'm looking for my project, but where are you? Someone's probably yelling at the screen. I've seen it. That's Maryland's primary school. If I can't find it, I'll just show you what this report does anyway. There we go, Upper Minnetonka Primary School. And another case for locking headings. But this is the actual revenue forecasted, and it's been risk adjusted, so that's why it's half the cost. That's the cost. And so you're getting a forecasted margin of negative 92% on this particular job. So you've got a forecast cost to completion, you've got a final forecast revenue based on the contracted value, risk adjusted. And as you go through, you'll start to get percentage complete and earned value on those jobs with WIP and a forecast profit margin at completion. And it'll just cycle through and update over time. And you can start to track performance as it progresses rather than when the project's finished. All right, just bear with us a sec, check out my agenda. So the final part of this presentation is the maintenance of all of that data. And there's a few different things that you can do to maintain. As I mentioned at the beginning, if we come back into UniPhi and we go to the summary screen, one of the main benefits, especially with using UniPhi to do your submissions, things always shift and rarely forward. What you can do is go into the schedule, tick this link dates, and when you get feedback from your rumor mill in the marketplace and you know that this thing's not going to go to tender for another 3 months, you can just push out the first phase, probably even conservatively into next year, and all these dates update and hit save, and that will have a cascading effect throughout the system on cash flow and resource plans. You've basically moved that profile across. Similarly, if I go into another one that I did earlier and go to the resources and resource planning, if you're in this screen, you can just tick that particular button, tick offset, and go, that's been delayed by a quarter, and everything gets pushed out into the future. It's no longer aligning to those life cycle dates, so it's probably better to do that. But if you're not doing life cycle dates, if you don't have these colors here because you haven't gone and put those dates in, you can do the same thing by using that offset. Now you can do that in flight as well. In that instance, you'd be doing it using the actual forecast. When you're on actual forecast, you can see you've got an actuals to period. And when you're in that period, it's grayed out. You can't actually change it. So this data here is gray on the screen, a bit hard to see, but Trust me, it is. And then this is key. You can key into this one. And so the actuals are what the people have timesheeted to, and then you can use the same sort of delay functionality for the remaining hours to push those out using that offset function there. You can also set that up and then rebaseline. You'll see that once you've done that forecast, if you want to track to that, you could rebaseline. Similarly, if you've set up the budget and you haven't set up a forecast, the way our forecast came in when I did my demonstration was from the contract system. So when you set up a budget initially and then import it into a contract, that becomes a forecast resource plan. So you've got now a baseline. However, if you're not using that contract methodology, you can still rebaseline and copy budget. So that'll move the profile from the different lines. And that's obviously benefit to that is the ability to track. And so when I change this for you to be all, you're now getting 2 lines. You're getting an actual forecast 223.5 for Andy, 243 as he expected, and he's 19.7 hours less than what we originally thought. And down the bottom is the total across that project. So you're now expecting to do less time on that project than you originally thought, but the timeline has gone out. And so the revenue would be delayed. Even though the profit might be the same, the cash flow impact will be there for you to work on. And so, month by month, project by project, again, hopefully with a dispersed methodology that a team lead or a job captain or a project manager, whatever they're called in your particular business, would be tasked with managing their particular piece. When everyone starts managing their particular piece, the senior management within the business can just be running these reports, whether it's resource planning, percentage allocation, or whether it's cash flow, and actually determine how well their business is performing by region as a business overall, and make amends or celebrate depending on the result. So I'm just going to check the chat feed, see if there's anything interesting in there to respond to. So yeah, I mean, what's interesting about day-to-day and long-term, if people do their timesheets as a forward timesheet, like I showed right at the beginning, that actually feeds into the resource planning profile for that period. But then you can have the month out 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 coming from the resource planning screen. So we've seen 2 separate screens, the timesheet forecast screen, and we've seen the resource planning screen. They interrelate, they connect, kind of like linking cells in Excel. If someone does a timesheet forecast, that will go in and will update the short-term resource plan for that, but the longer-term resource plan will still be there. No, I'm not big enough. So that's the thing about scale, right? When you're 20 people, you can do it in your head. I use the revenue cash flow to determine whether I'm going to need to recruit. So I guess I do in a way. I really like that concept, and I saw it work for a 500-person organization. It worked really well. Just the time to update. I think once you get to a scale of 100 people plus, you can't do it in your head anymore, and you need to allocate the 20 people sort of allocation to those project managers who are managing 20 people, and then you get the consolidated view. So no, I'm not using that functionality for my own workforce. Thanks, Bob. Any other questions? Hopefully that didn't go through too fast. It's a common issue of mine. It is recorded, so you can go back at your own pace later and check it out. You can chat to us about it. We're pretty keen. That Nirvana methodology, as far as I'm aware, is not being used anywhere, to be honest. We built that import resource plan functionality for a specific project for a client, and by the time we got it ready for them, unfortunately, they'd already found a workaround, and it was complicated to go back and use it. So I think it's really cool. We're actually working on a new release on the 1st of November that's going to streamline that process even more. But what we really like to do to get this to actually work perfectly is to really buddy up with clients and get an iterative loop going where we can get the feedback, this isn't working, this needs to tab across the rows instead of down, we need to lock column headings and row headings here, there, and everywhere, and we work with you guys to get it right. So feel free to say, look, we really want to nail this resource planning challenge with like what you got so far, let's get it right, and we'll do so accordingly. People are using the forward timesheeting tool, and it's working quite well for them. And people are using the forward workload by dollar field because they're already cash flowing, and that because they've got service codes in there, that's working well for them. But no one's using the import resource plan. People are using the resource plan to get an estimate at completion quite regularly, but it's not really a resource plan. It's just to get an estimate at completion. It's a forecasting methodology to get dollars. It's not really looking at who's over allocated, who's under allocated, how many resources do I need. As far as I know, there could be someone out there that's doing that. I'm not across all of our clients, which is really cool because it means we've got a few. And that's the big challenge, right? Everyone's looking at it from a different perspective. So it's quite difficult to get a piece of software that manages all of those. But we do have those options. I wouldn't say any of them are perfect, but happy to hear how they could be. And happy to answer and do other demos if you want to ask the questions. You can unmute yourself if you prefer to do it with your voice, or you can ask it in the chat. Otherwise, being 11:45, lunch is calling. I'll stop the recording and